Welcome to the Venture Black podcast. I'm Evan Poncelet, the executive director of Venture Black. Today we're joined by Mark Monroe. Mark Monroe is a Seattle-based entrepreneur and venture capitalist known for founding My Unfold, a tech platform that transformed recruitment and was acquired by Monster in 2016. After a successful exit, he spent 5 years investing in and supporting startups as a venture capitalist. Currently, Mark leads From the Culture, empowering culturally significant startups, and co-founded the Come Up series, which educates and empowers investors. His career spans tech, innovation, investment, financial education, became a key figure in the startup ecosystem, and a dedicated mentor to the next generation of entrepreneurs and investors. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
So, could you maybe start us off with sharing the moment you decided to bet on yourself in the first really big way, starting with My Unfold, and how that journey took? We spoke about it previously at a Black Founders and Funders meeting, but I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could tell me kind of the moments leading up to that decision and what you had been doing, and then when you took the jump.
Yeah. So I was currently serving as Chief Operating Officer for Urban Tech Systems, a Black civil engineering and construction management firm here. And the launch pad for me when it came to the idea of My Unfold was really just we were coming out of the financial crisis, and anybody who was around during that time realizes like the tough times of a lot of folks that lost their jobs, and then essentially the job market had this large influx of folks that were like you saw this like the clash of generations where you had my generation that was looking to step into the marketplace for landing jobs, and then they were competing against folks who had been recently laid off, and essentially it was like this whole conundrum of experience versus new blood, new ideas. And essentially like the question was like, how do we really quantify that? How do we validate that so that way we know that we're hiring the right people? And how it really took off for me was, like literally listening to college students, like, after I had finished college. Um, and then on top of that, like, scrolling through your Facebook at the time, and seeing, just the complaints of folks in whom which that you went to college with. They were like, hey, struggling to get a job, anybody else experiencing these same things. And then, also going on LinkedIn and noticing that, you had a lot of recruiters on that side that were like, hey, where's the talent? Like, how is like, and then how can we be so sure about the talent? So that really became the launch pad for me because I was like, well, I kind of sit in a very interesting situation right now because I can see both sides. And I look at them as like two ships that were passing through the night. And so I just wanted to create like a beacon light so that way essentially like they could see each other, and literally build a connection. And so, that's ultimately the launch pad of how is it that we got there to like literally start building out the idea. I mean, version one was horrible, as it is with most founders. I think it was like version one to version six. They were just like it was just a process of just getting it right, and then because when you first start off as a founder, you want to like just throw everything in the kitchen sink out there, and because it's like, oh well, it's got to have this feature, it's got to have that feature, and then that's when we really started to hone in, like started like getting more reading material like the Lean Startup, from Eric Ries, and understanding that okay, hey, it's just an iterative process where start off with the minimal things that ultimately make your product go. And so once when we did that, that's when really we started to pick up steam, and we just retooled, reshaped, and really like at that point, My Unfold just started to go in a like just it was kind of like a blast off moment, and we were just like, oh man, it took us all this time just to get there, but
You,
that was our
you
launch pad moment.
mentioned you mentioned we, and so who else was with you on this journey in the early beginnings?
Yeah, so I had my co-founders. I had Eugene Kim, I had Alex Diaz, and then at the time I had Jonathan Henson, who's now principal at Amazon. And Alex Diaz has just been able to go on, and he's just a marketing connoisseur. Um, and so, and Eugene was like a marketing student also that was coming out of the University of Washington. So it was a pretty diverse group of folks that were ultimately like starting off and just building something pretty cool. And so, like I said, it was just it was interesting because you got one side that's like thinking pure engineer,
Hmm.
and you got other guys that are thinking like, okay, hey, like what is the messaging? What does it send to, what does it send to the audience? What is that zero moment of truth? And then there's me that is, more so in the sense of, how will the customer see this?
Mhm.
Like, our stakeholders that actually will pay to keep the lights on, how will they see it? Um, so yeah, that was a pretty cool process, and really just trying to understand the ebbs and flows and the delicate balance. Luckily for me, like coming from a civil engineering firm, that where you get to see how engineers think, and then on top of that, coming from the tech space prior, you know, you kind of get an understanding of it, and you're like, okay, well, it's kind of like, okay, hey, like engineers always think about what makes sense, at the
Mhm.
moment, and then also in the sense of what makes sense for the future. Whereas folks on the business side, they're like, what makes sense now?
Right. And so you went out, you developed an MVP, and then maybe you were like, okay, this is a bit much. We got to do more lean startup work with this. And then, so first question I should ask is like, how did you find your co-founders to like join up with you on this?
So, Jonathan and I, we knew each other since my days of college. I met my co-founder Eugen, who we really got things up and going. I met him just through playing soccer at UW, and he was getting ready to graduate the next year. And essentially, we were just talking about like some of the pain points that he was experiencing, and it was just like, okay, there was this mesh. And then he had a friend, Alex Diaz, and whom which that he introduced me to, who was like, just all about like telling customer, like focus on customer stories, customer journey. And so Alex came later, but it started off with myself and Eugen. And then essentially I went and asked Jonathan, hey, can you help us build this idea? Because at the time, Amazon wasn't what it was.
Mhm.
So it was like they were still in that like, okay, that iterative process. And in response is like, I think I joined an advisory board to Amazon for their bar raisers, where they were doing
Mhm.
the bar raiser for new applicants. And so, it was kind of cool, like like how everything kind of fell into place, because here it is, bar raiser advisory for understanding like what candidates need to be prepared for. And then two of my other co-founders were like actually looking for jobs.
Mhm.
So it was like, okay, well, let's create something so that way essentially like everybody else doesn't have to experience these pain points.
Kind of like a bar raiser for everybody. Like,
Exactly. And that's
yeah.
actually what inspired us. Like, we literally created something in which that we would assess the person's hard skills, and on top of that, like we were also experimenting with soft skills. And then essentially at the end of that, then it would ultimately connect you to recruiters that were already looking for those specific skills, and you had already passed the assessment. So essentially it's like it's pretty much okay, hey, like now that you've done this, now you're connected to the jobs that you would probably be applying for. And so let's go ahead and just like get you in. And it made the process so much faster, versus essentially like, just a person just consistently going through an ATS system and just getting lost within the shuffle.
Right. And so you got a minimum viable product together.
Mhm.
How long did it take for you to get your kind of first customer from like when you were launching?
It took us like probably like about maybe 2 months, because the first month it was like, there was a lot of feedback that we were ultimately receiving. And so that was the major part. And then when we started like really like showing that, okay, hey, that these things are actually quantifiable, it was like, we just I forget, there was a recruitment firm, I think it was Wimmer Solutions here in Seattle, where they do a lot of the technical recruitment for a lot of the tech companies here, and we found out that that was our sweet spot. And instead of just going like trying to like go into the place where the actual companies are, we said, okay,
Mhm.
hey, well, let's go to the recruitment firms that are also doing the recruitment for them and letting them use the tool. And that was just like a match made in heaven, because they're going through so much flow of candidates and everything else, whether on contracting or FTE jobs, that it just made sense.
Okay. And so you got this tool. At this point, like, what were you thinking in terms of like pricing or selling, or was it more just like getting them to use it and pay attention to it?
Yeah, so the first mode was just for them to use it and pay attention to it, and just to see, okay, hey, is this something that would fit within their workflow, before workflow was actually a thing that people talked
Mhm.
about. Um, and then, once when we realized and we started to see, like, we started to understand exactly like what type of value that produces, and we understood the math behind it as it pertains to the cost to hire. I
Mhm.
mean, we realized that essentially like the cost to hire, a candidate going through the entire life cycle can be anywhere between, at the time it was $16,000 to $78,000 when you think
Mhm.
about it. And that's just to hire. That's just getting to the part where the candidate is officially hired. So going
Mhm.
all the way through that process. And so we literally had to just break down some of the economics of it. And then that's ultimately what kind of helped us. And then getting a good gauge as it pertains to what is it that they were already paying for versus
Mhm.
essentially a tool like this, which made a lot of the process streamlined. And so we just said, okay, hey, well, this is what we're going to charge. And just, we were just like, okay, foot in the door, not door to the face.
Mhm.
So I think that we kind of came in a little bit. I think we kind of like lowballed ourselves at first. But I think that for us, we always consider it in the sense of like, okay, the relationships matter versus like, just immediately just, jumping it or jacking up the price. And so we always believe that essentially like, okay, if we have a great relationship and they have a great relationship with the product and they enjoy using it and it has results, then essentially the price increases can come later.
Yeah. And so, like, you got that bit of traction, and so at some point in time, you decided you want to go out and raise capital to maybe increase the development velocity, or for different things. So, when did you reach that point, and how did you approach fundraising?
Oh man, it was a crash course for fundraising for me. I mean, like there was like you have to remember like in 2012, 2013, 2014 there really was no real blueprint like outside of what you read in books and stuff like that or what you heard at different conferences and the answers would vary across the board. So there really was no strong blueprint as it pertains to like, what happened or how it was it supposed to happen. Luckily, we were pretty good as it pertains to going out there and making relationships. I always said that the easiest thing for me is that if they say no, they just say no. And that's okay. And also, can you give me some advice or can you point me in the direction? So for us, what made sense for us when we started realizing that we needed more people, like we realized that the requests are coming in. The feature requests were increasing significantly, and we were just like, look, we don't have the bandwidth.
Hmm.
we don't
Hmm.
we just don't have the bandwidth. Um, and so from there, it just, yeah, it really made sense that essentially that we needed to turn a lot of folks like full time versus working on it part time. And then that's when I started going to go seek raising capital. And that was an interesting that was an interesting process within itself.
And so, yeah, could you explain more about the process?
Yeah, so the process was like, so here's what we went through. We went through angel groups, and I tend to find that, like it put a sour taste in my mouth as it pertains to angel groups, because it was like you just go through all these hoops and everything else. And, all the while that you're going through these hoops, and at the same token, it's like, hey, like you really need to like have that infusion of capital. It's just kind of like it's counter productive. And then we started going to speak with larger firms like the Madronas of the world, the Mavrons of the world, and then of course we went on down to Silicon Valley or San Francisco and going through that arena. And the challenge was that we realized is that here in Seattle it's very risk averse as it
Hmm.
pertains to like raising capital. It's very slow to raise capital here in Seattle, which is wild to me. Which,
Right.
when you think about how many millionaires per capita reside in Washington State, but a lot of folks at the time they were very much so focused on real estate and investing. But literally going like I think that we went through like so many different editions of a pitch deck. I think that we probably had like iteration like 54 of our pitch
Hmm.
deck, um, which was wild within itself. Which also led to like rebranding changes, which I mean, I think that was like going to happen either way. And then of course, like, really like we took pieces of information in which that we gathered from everybody and we said, okay, hey, well, we examined what they said versus essentially like the companies that currently sat within their portfolio. And then we kind of like made a judgment call to say, okay, hey, is what they're saying make sense? One. And then two, are they like outside of just capital? Are they the ones that could lead us towards that pathway towards success or be a part of it? Because one of the things that I realized is that founders should be also interviewing investors just as much as investors are interviewing founders.
True.
Um, and so, yeah, that was a massive challenge. And then when I got down to San Francisco, it was a whole different thing because, mind you, like you didn't really see many Black tech founders,
Hmm.
during that time frame. You just didn't. And it sucked because you really felt it, like in the sense of, hey, on their side, it's like here's this person that honestly I don't know. I don't have no type of I can't identify with. So essentially, it's like either I look at them as a unicorn or I look at them as like hey, like a person that I can't understand. And I think that ultimately for me, what made me a little bit lucky is because of the fact of my knowledge within publicly traded markets as an investor.
Hmm.
And so I was able to understand quickly and how the language goes, which made it easier. The first 10 pitches that I did, though, I sucked. I'm not going to lie. I was terrible. Um, but but at the same time, I was also like very keen on like one, how do we tell the story? And then two, you know, showing that there's a path, not the pathway to profitability, but showing that like this is actually something that's viable and that the traction that we have, it's growing. Um, but yeah, I got like 37 no's.
We got to suck to get good, I think, is the main thing. The people who succeed fight through the suck. So.
Yeah, you got to. You just got to fight through it. It's look, the no's are inevitable. The no's are inevitable. And I don't think that it was just race that also played a role into it, though that it did have its part. I think it was also the fact that essentially like, okay, hey, it's in a space that also is challenging and sometimes could be somewhat slow to move.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was a lot of variables that came into play. And then on top of that, it's like, maybe it just wasn't considered sexy enough, though that everybody needs recruitment as they
Mhm.
grow. So, and then on top of that, like LinkedIn was like, it still wasn't what it was yet, but it was on the rise, but it was really more so for networking, not really for the
Mhm.
jobs per se at the time. Um, and so yeah, it was just wild. And then I got the best advice from an investor, that which was my only investor actually.
And
Um,
who was that investor?
that was Mitch and Frida Kapor of Kapor Capital.
And so how did that go? We talked about this a little earlier, but if you could run me through how that
Yeah,
went.
so I'm sitting there in the like I went into pitch and we're literally going through, and mind you, we were a web app at the time. And um it was interesting because I'm sitting there in this meeting and he's like, love the pitch, love it all. He's like, there's just one little problem. And I was like, what's that? He was like, you need to go mobile. And he was like, and you might be very much so sold out on, like all in on this web-based platform, which makes sense. But he was like, if you really want to like increase your massive critical mass number of users, especially like the applicants, which are going to be your data pool, he was like, definitely go mobile. And he was like, if that's something that you want to do, like, call me anytime. I'd be willing to invest. He was like, but I know that this is a hard decision. So I understand that this might be a no. I called him at 3 a.m. in the morning. And I told him, I was like, we're going mobile. And yeah, he wrote us a check.
There we go.
And there it was. We had our pretty much pre-seed round or a seed round of capital in which that we raised. And
What was that amount to get you staffed up?
so to get us fully staffed up, it was 750K, which was the check that they wrote. Um, and so yeah, it was pretty much off to the races. I mean, we weren't like some people were also phasing out. Like for example, Jonathan had phased out. So we had some of the founders that were also like, that transitioned into other roles. I mean, of course, they were like working at other jobs and everything else. Some of them working at pre-IPO companies, which they were going to get, you know, fed handsomely versus what is it that we could provide.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it was more so in the sense that it came at the right time because at the same token, we were just retooling the team to be able to handle the influx of requests and everything else. So yeah,
Kind of like a little bit of a regime change or
it
changing of the guard.
was. It definitely felt like a musical chairs moment,
Mm.
where it's just like, okay, we have some folks on the way out, and then we got some new folks on the way in, and it was just okay. We're trying to make this work. We're trying to make it flow, and yeah,
So
that's
was that the only round that you raised, was the pre-seed, and then you
that
went
was
from
it.
there to
That was
product
it.
market fit? And then how
Yep.
did that exit play out? Like, in how many years from when you raised capital did it take for you to get to exit?
So that was like a year because that was like around the time when acquisitions really started to heat up. Like
Mm.
the acquisition market was really, really heating up. Um, and so like you just started seeing companies being gobbled up left to right. I remember even like, Facebook went on this whole tirade of just like doing what we call acqui-hires,
Right,
where
right.
they were spending like I think it was like 14 to 25 million just to acquire the team.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, even our competitor was acquiring. I mean, you had Monster acquiring, you had Indeed acquiring, you had LinkedIn acquiring, and lo and behold, who would have thought? LinkedIn was acquiring, and then ultimately they got acquired by Microsoft. So,
Mm, mm,
um, but yeah, that was within the next year, and so the interesting thing of how it came about was the fact that like I got approached by someone. I think it was like from their I guess intelligence ops or something like that team. And they were like, it was more like a CIO, like where it was like, they wanted to just like garner information and everything else. And of course I was like kind of like on reserve, and I'm like, I'm not gonna like literally give you any secret sauce here.
mm,
But he was like, no, he was like, we love to sit down and have more further conversations, and seeing how is it that like something like this could like literally go through, the Monster platform. And I'm thinking like, okay, hey, you guys are thinking about partnering. Hey, look, this takes us to a whole different stratosphere. And nope, this was like I totally misread the room. It was it was like, everybody's trying to gobble up everybody, and this is a winner take all market.
mm.
Even some of the platforms in which that we were in the process of partnering with, they were getting acquired. So, like two of our potential partners ultimately got acquired by LinkedIn.
Oh, interesting, interesting. So it's just a race for who could get the most, I guess, views from the recruiting side. So
Yeah.
how many people were on your platform at that point, or like what made you kind of a
Oh,
standout?
I mean, at this point, like it's hard to count because we had college recruitment centers. So you had like Dartmouth and all these other, universities that were ultimately using it. Of course, we had some HBCUs that were using it, and then of course, like local universities here at University of Washington and Seattle U. So college students were really our bread and butter because we
Mm.
realized that okay, hey, like the funnel for college students it won't stop; it'll just keep going.
Right.
And what they can validate, it can come faster than them ultimately writing or having to spend time or hours to write a resume and cover letter.
Mhm, mhm,
And so, at that point in time, we had like, I think it was like over 32 colleges that were
mm,
using the platform. I mean, we had probably at the time, I think there was like 15, recruitment firms that were recruiting like, and we're talking about like at a mass scale
mhm,
of like a wide array of jobs. And we were only going to be growing. I think that we were going to probably be sitting down that year and having conversation with an actual like company that was in the S&P 500 that wanted to take on and probably embed this into their system, into their workflow. So yeah, that's where everything just really just started to pop off, and we're like, okay, like this is looking good.
And so were they trying to like acquire the team, or was it going to be kind of like
No,
they
they
would
wanted the
fold you?
product. They wanted the
Okay.
product. And so I later found out after acquisition was over, after going through that whole due diligence process. And it was actually fairly quick because like we got acquired and then next they got acquired.
That's funny.
So they acquired us and then Randstad came through and acquired Monster. Um and so I think that, yeah, I think that the market was like we definitely saw that the market itself was shifting. It was very much so shifting in the sense that, you were going through a consolidation period. And so you're removing all the major all the major players are removing all the potential, companies that have massive potential.
Mhm.
Um, you know, they were just being wiped up off of the board. So,
Consolidation phase.
yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so how did the acquisition go? Like, did they acquire for like a multiple of revenue, or like how were they looking at that?
No. I mean, like, because they understood that essentially that they were looking at it from back in that time, they were looking at it more so from the mass as it pertains to what does it look like at scale.
Hmm.
And that was really the conversation that was consistently being thrown around. Like, okay, hey, like this at scale with critical mass users. Let's say if you guys have 100 college students, and let's say if you guys start charging those college students, and then let's say that you're still like you are charging, those companies that are ultimately doing the massive hire. Because mind you, we made it free through the whole time. Like
Hmm.
the whole time the platform was free. We were actually taking the Facebook model of
The
like,
market
okay,
share. Yeah.
just it was all about market share for us. And so I think that it was enough for them to realize like, okay, hey, they're making some significant dents here because of the fact that from we're seeing activity from like, our metrics and seeing that, okay, hey, we're not getting the numbers in which that we're accustomed to because for them it's like a science. And so when they saw that, they were like, okay, hey, well, we're thinking about it at what does this look like over at scale? And so, and I think they knew something that we didn't, because one of our, one of the companies that we were partnered with was, I think it was Smarter, and they were going to bring some of their assessments into our platform, like for us to partner up with, and they got acquired by LinkedIn. And so, and then the other company that we were trying to partner with was lynda.com. They got acquired by LinkedIn.
Mm, 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 mm.
And
So they were
so,
pretty much just trying to steal you out from LinkedIn.
right. So it was like it was very fast, like in the sense of like, okay, it's kind of like we went through it was kind of like going through the investment process where it's like, okay, hey, get to know, like, let's sit down and have conversation, talk to us about the platform. Non-disclosures are signed as it pertains as it pertains to what can be discussed behind what's underneath the hood. And then of course getting to know like us, like, who we are. um and then after that, it was more so in the sense of like, getting an idea for me, like, okay, hey, well, what will it look like when you look to turn on the lights? And I was like giving them an idea at the time. I can't remember the number, but I was letting them know like this is what we're looking at when we decide to start like turning this into revenue. Um, and you know, they were like, okay, we've got enough. And then there was like this quiet period of like a week or two, and then called us up for a meeting and wanted to sit down and talk a little bit further and talk about like, what does that look like, if we were to join, what would be roles and everything else, what does that look like? And then after that, it was like, I think it was like another 3 weeks later we received the offer as it pertains to acquisition.
And so how did it go post acquisition? So you got
Post acquisition was wild, like, because it was like, so we're acquired, and mind you, it was like, typically when you get acquired, there's like a golden handcuffs period.
Mhm.
And so our golden handcuffs period was like for like the folks in which that were like kind of like, okay, hey, they're not going to be around forever. I think that they had some folks that were like 3 to 6 months. Mine was going to go for a year. Um, which I was sitting there just praying to myself. I was like, I really don't want to stay here for a whole year. Like,
Mm.
I mean, it's great and all, but um, yeah, I don't want to do it.
Mhm, mhm.
And like I was like literally praying. And then next thing because the reason why is like, because now I'm working underneath I'm within the Trojan horse of something of the
Right.
company that I didn't, I was like, this is the reason why I built this was because of the fact that, XYZ. And then next thing you know, we're hearing rumblings about another acquisition. So I'm like, oh, who's going to be the next person that's coming in? And mind you, this is like within the first few weeks
Mm, mm.
of like after, acquisition. So, and then that's when we found out that, oh, yeah, the company is going to be acquired.
That's interesting. That's
And so
and
then
so
it was
how
just
much
like,
of that did you get to view, or was it just kind of, like, happening around you
it
for
was
a
just
little bit?
happening. It was just happening. Like, it was like, oh, they're getting acquired. So then at this point, I'm like trying to position myself like, okay, well, what does this look like? How does this happen? And they move like kind of quickly. Like, I'm seeing the same thing that everybody else is kind of seeing. I saw a memo that went out and saying that the rumors are true. That essentially that there's an offer that's been placed on the table. We're now going through the due diligence process and also the negotiations. Um, and that was it. Like that was it. And so I was like afraid to at this point I'm kind of like afraid to say anything. So I'm like I'm just gonna be the fly in the wall and just if you say something in the room that I happen to be in, great. If not, okay, bet. Um, and then next thing you know, uh, from that point, I think it was like a week later, they were acquired.
Mhm.
Um, Deal was done, and I was just like, oh, I wonder if they were already in process of doing this deal long before they were in the process of doing our deal.
Mhm, mhm. And maybe
Exa-
your deal was, like, a part of hitting certain numbers that they needed to do
I
their deal
guess
or something?
so, and it made sense. But the beautiful thing for me was the fact that they said, "Hey, we're releasing, your golden handcuffs. We'll still keep on. We'll still hold on to everything, and we'll ultimately, you know, pretty much close you out." And
Mm,
I mean, prayers answered. I was
there we
happy.
go.
I was happy for a moment. Like now, mind you, I didn't have any stock. It was just more so in the sense of cash, and so just more so waiting for that to come through. Um, just because of the fact that it was like, okay, hey, now that acquisition is taking place, like, does this affect me? Didn't affect me at all. So ultimately, I was happy. And then I was looking on to the next thing, which was, venture capital.
Mm, mhm. And so let's talk about that. So the next step of your journey. So after that, you took some winnings from that exit deal, and
Mhm,
you were thinking, okay, how am I gonna multiply this out or make it exponential? And so
mhm.
venture capital was your next step. And so how did that journey go? Like getting into that, and did you have partners in setting up a firm, or yeah, how did that beginning story
So
go?
I first started off as like just a silent investor, like a super angel, so to speak. And then I realized, okay, I need a little bit more sophistication, like, because, and, looking at better deals. So I assembled a small team, and they were just like, hey, we'll just be silent. We'll literally bring you like deals and everything else that we're seeing from our books because they had access to San Francisco deals,
Mhm.
um, and some New York based, but I didn't really invest into anything in New York. Um, and so like literally, it was more so me kind of like still navigating the ship, but like really with a great deal of help from folks that were giving me advisory and also understanding exactly like, how the fund should operate, what should be our objectives,
Mhm.
doing a small raise for folks that wanted to participate. So essentially like, now I'm like, okay, I'm actually managing a fund, not just my own funds, but I'm actually managing like other folks who want to invest alongside with me. So that was cool, but it also, of course, like they'll tell you, like, when you're doing that, your bosses are now the LPs in which that you bring
Yep.
within the structure. Um, and there was a whole world out there that I had to learn like literally overnight. Um, because I have this habit of like going fast and like, learning as I go. Um, but it was a whole learning curve within the first year. of just like what that process looks like, all the formation of docs, structures. Um, then after that, things pretty much were pretty smooth sailing. Deals came my way. Um,
And what was your thesis? Like, what sorts of companies were you looking to invest in?
I remember my first thesis was I'm looking for anything that's disruptive tech.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
definitely had to refine that. And so essentially what we were looking for was SaaS, consumer base, tech, sports tech, and enterprise. I mean,
Hmm.
like B2B. Um, but really the sweet spot for us at the time was like really B2B SaaS or, consumer related tech. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, like going through that entire process, that was, it had its challenges because mind you, I didn't understand the full on enterprise, world, but luckily I had somebody on my team that did. So that was pretty
Hmm.
cool. Um, but yeah, it sucked though. It started to suck in like as I was coming to the end of year two.
And so, where was the suck? Like, how did it start to come down?
Um, the reason why it started to come down for me was because it was like, okay, outside of writing a check, it's like, and outside of like receiving a quarterly report, it just got boring.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was just, it was boring. Like, it was just like, and for anybody that's out there watching, it's nothing like what you see on Shark Tank. That's not the case. Um, Shark Tank always makes things look sexy, but that's not the process. The Monday meetings as it pertains to discussing, things in the pipeline for portfolio, you know, it kind of like took a piece from me because of the fact that, I had to think about it from the standpoint of like, these are very crazy, cool ideas that
Hmm.
I am not able to participate and help build.
Hmm. Hmm.
And at first, it was just like, oh man, that's a cool idea. I would, if I was a part of this, I would build it like this. And that's how it started. And
Hmm.
then it just started getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Because you were passionate about innovation, and you just had this amazing journey coming through, having your company built and acquired, and then you're just kind of like on the bench, like watching other people do it. Of course, you're being a part of their journey,
You're a
but not.
part, but you're not really, And I put it in the mindset of the best way that I can like help people like understand what that feeling is like. Having a successful exit in a company is like winning an NBA title.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then it's like then it's like, you being the entrepreneur, like you're like that basketball player that wants to go out and get more and you want to chase that same feeling. And so for me, it was just like I wanted to chase that same feeling. And the thing is, I didn't learn this until way later on, like post, VC life, is that the fact is that it changes because of the fact is that it's no longer you. It's more so in the sense that you're seeing it through the eyes of other people through their first time. You're seeing it from, the process in which that they go through. So, for me, I didn't fully grasp that part yet until like I was already long gone. Um, but I think I made the right decision, to literally transition out of VC life and go into back into like, working with entrepreneurs. Though I did love the fact of like, the vetting of businesses, like the understanding of like, okay, hey, looking for holes within companies and like pressing till it hurts. And I was like one of those individuals that even if you pitched me and if I said no, I wasn't one of those individuals that just told you no and then just said, okay, hey, well, this just isn't a good fit for me.
Right.
Like I would give you legitimate reasons why, and I would tell you why this was just not going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't realize that wasn't what everybody else was doing.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, that was the process, that was the process for me, like to realize that, my way back home was, ultimately taking the things that I loved about venture capital, the process, the vetting, the looking at it from the overall market opportunity size. And then on top of that, its viability and the things that I love about being an entrepreneur, which is building. And I was able to marry those two together with FTC.
And so with the FTC, how did that have its origins? Like, so you'd gotten through, and your VC firm was called Red Eye, is that correct?
Hmm.
And then coming out of VC in that second year, you're like, okay, well, I want to I want to be more on the founder journey. Like, I want to be more involved
Yeah.
in building. And so how did you navigate that pivot?
The way that I navigated the pivot was after I stepped down and after everything was like, stepping, away. And it was kind of like as I was stepping down, I was just thinking about it massively in the sense of, hey, you know, it sucks that essentially that, I hear a lot of great ideas. Um, where are the ideas that come from people who look like me?
Mhm.
I see a lot of underrepresentation within the market space. And so, what is it that I can do, if anything, that can, bring forth change in that, while also like making something profitable. Um, and so then that's when I really started to give FTC some serious thought. Um, yeah, so it was more so in the sense of like it was, and it's always been mission led here for me at FTC, like what we do. And then it's more, and then on the flip side of it is just like, okay, hey, how is it, like the challenge for me was going to be how is it I can bridge those two worlds together and build a firm that literally brings in the greatest things that we love about venture capital, which gives us first in, first out, also like having access to companies and ideas. But then also the reason why we have access to those things is because we get to participate in helping them build and grow and scale. So, that's really where the inspiration came from. Um, and just wanting to see like, if I can, pretty much recreate, I wouldn't say copies of myself like Agent Smith,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
like more so in the sense of like inspiring and also like, working with founders that similar backgrounds, or under also just folks that are just not represented at the table. um how is it that we can be a part changing those economics so that way essentially it's like it looks like, the founder's success looks like everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, what advice would you give Black founders seeking funding in the Pacific Northwest or beyond?
Seeking funding here in the Pacific Northwest, one depends upon like the business that you're in. If you're an enterprise, then I would say the number one thing is just don't go run to every single investor, because they may not invest in your space, and it's a good thing to always, they're going to do their due diligence on you, so you should be doing your due diligence on them and asking yourself, like, do you see yourself as one of their portfolio companies, not from a wishful thinking bias standpoint, but really that real honesty with self and saying, hey, does this company fit as it pertains to their investment thesis? And if it
Mhm.
does, then essentially, okay, hey, go ahead and have the conversations. Sometimes they can make themselves unavailable, but it's probably because of it's not just to be, they're not doing that to be a jerk, but it's just more so in the sense of, one, are you serious about what it is that you're doing? And then two, more so in the sense that they are probably being seen, or they're probably having a ton of folks pitching them always. So really like, seeing if you can, find folks within their network to like literally make those introductions. Um, Raising capital in Seattle is very risk averse. It's risk averse first. Very slow. I would probably say 80% of the capital that you will truly raise will not be here in Seattle. Though that
Mhm.
we should be changing that. We should be working hard to change that. Um, because this should be the place where you should be able to raise, your rounds of capital.
Yeah, number one tech talent dense region of the country, and we're
Exactly.
taking it easy on the risk aversion. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Exactly. Um, And, honestly, it's like, the biggest thing that's going to be the challenge for founders of color or black founders is you just got to learn how to speak their language. You got to learn how to speak the language as it pertains to venture capital. And if you understand how to speak their language, and I think that the beautiful thing about that is learn how to speak their language, then it makes it easier for you to pitch. And on top of that, you'll also look at your business very differently. That's one of the things that, when I spoke at the Venture Black event recently, is like, hey, there's a world beyond, you just sitting there in front of VCs and pitching. It's not like they're just going to go to their secret vault and just like pull out the cash and say, okay, hey, no, it's a whole process for them because of the fact is that they're in the business of managing their partners, funds and investing it wisely. So really just understanding how that works, and then also asking yourself like how risky is your business, and if you are risky, how can you work to get the company to minimize as much risk by, like, say for example, more traction, getting to a place where it's not just like, okay, hey, I have one customer, but having a traction that says, okay, hey, that like more people will be looking to knock on your door, and this is like, okay, you need to raise capital now in order to essentially grow.
Mm,
9 times out of 10, the reason why a company raises capital is so that way they can hire more people because they need to. um, and so if you're in that standpoint of like, okay, hey, you're hitting that arena, you're hitting that ceiling of growth, then that's where raising capital makes sense. And then it's more so in the sense of like, are you just a business that still is a revenue generating business, or are you a revenue generating or potential revenue generating business that is venture scalable? They're not the
mm,
same. Like, and that's the thing that like people sometimes tend to forget. Like, I have this, let's say I have this like juice company, and I'm going to just have this brick and mortar store. That's probably not going to be venture scaled.
right.
Versus, I have a juice company that does subscription based, that ultimately like that doesn't really require brick and mortar outside of us, doing the co-packing. But
Mhm.
yeah, so those are the things naturally that I would probably say, you know, tend to be the issues that I think that Black founders will face.
And so, coming to the top of the hour, you're passionate about closing the racial wealth gap in a generation.
Mhm.
What does legacy mean to you? And how do you hope your work will be remembered?
So for me, it's like, I always say legacy starts after you. It never starts with you. And so, I think that the legacy starts with me, or it starts after, like, the things in which that I do here. It's going to be interesting to see what success comes from that, and, what have I spawned the next generation, the new era of entrepreneurs that are well versed, that also understand how the market is set, and also are able to participate in the market and actually be able to, dominate within a space. That's what a new era, new generation that closes the racial wealth gap looks like. A generation that is getting to the capital, and not only just getting to the capital, but reinvesting it, and also making the community stronger, with knowledge, with resources. I think that this, I play a part, but it's only a small part in the entire piece of the puzzle. Um, and I just hope that essentially that I'm doing our community a service, and continuously trying to push the barriers as far as we can, so that way essentially it's like, we're creating more space and more opportunity for folks that want to come in. I think that's the biggest thing. Like for me, legacy looks like one day I can literally travel somewhere, and because of the work that we did, you know you see more Black founders
Mhm.
getting the same type of checks that white founders are ultimately receiving, instead of receiving lesser size checks and having to work with less, but yet still being successful in spite of, you know, seeing, more exits from Black founders, seeing Black founders more knowledgeable about, not only their product, but more so the space that they're in, the industries that they're in, and dominating in them. Um, so yeah, that's what it looks like for me, legacy wise. And people can say that, okay, hey, like they want to, hey, we learned from the blueprint of watching, maybe Mark and Evan on the Come Up series, or at From the Culture, or Adventure Black, and being able to see, that this was a significant tectonic shift within the community that literally like spawns and inspires people to go out there and be dope entrepreneurs, dope founders that create some amazing shit.
Well said. Civil engineer, Tuskegee University educated, founder, exited founder, venture capitalist. I think
I
if
was
we
not a
can.
civil engineer. I was not a civil engineer.
Oh,
I was just a COO. Like
we'll
look,
see.
I let the engineers be engineers, and I'll be the operations.
Well, nonetheless, transitioning into successful exited founder, VC, running a startup studio, having a successful podcast to teach others about wealth generation in the public markets, I think indisputably, if we were able to create more Mark Monroes through our efforts, we would be, leaving a legacy we could be proud of. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I think we all learned a lot.
Thanks, brother. Anytime.